Hello, genealogists. This is Craig, and this is Just Genealogy. So, what I thought I'd share with you today is a little tidbit of Maryland genealogical colonial research and how I do that. There's various records that you want to collect for a place. And usually we do that at the county level. We look for marriage records, we look for probate, and we look for land records. Those are the three major things that we're going to look for in order to create a library that deals with a specific county. But there are circumstances where, especially in the colonial period, the material was not collected at the county level. It was collected at the colonial level. In other words, the colonial government collected the records, not the individual county. And an example of that in Maryland prior to 1777 is wills. So that makes it difficult. From the perspective of the wills have been abstracted, but there are 16 books, of which I've only pulled a few of them, largely because I didn't want to have to put 16 books back away, because they're filed by book number, they're not on the shelf altogether. They begin in the 1600s, and they go up to 1777, and usually they're in 3 or 4 or 5 year increments. And what I'm referring to is the Maryland Calendar of Wills. Originally, they were compiled by Jane Baldwin, also known as Jane Baldwin Cotton. I always refer to them as Cotton. And the first, I believe, 7 volumes were done by Cotton, and the next volumes were done by F. Edward Wright, bringing us all the way up to 1777. Now, the problem with this is you have to guess the year, and then you go looking in the index, and you have to go through all the indexes to find something. And you may eventually like to do that. I mean, I've done that for years, but then years ago I came across another book that was helpful to me, and that's Index to Colonial Wills by Magruder, and it covers 1634 when the wills begin all the way up to 1777. So it's very easy to go into this book as a single book, as an index to these 16 books, and pull out the name, because obviously it's an index in alphabetical order. So, for example, let's pick Obadiah Howe, 1687. He's in Calvert County, and it is book 4, page 266. These books are not in alphabetical order. They're chronologically, but then I would go to the index of this book, just to make it easier, and look up Howe. And there's Obadiah Howe, and he's on page 21. So I can go to 21 very easily and see Obadiah Howe of Calvert County, 11 February 1686 is when it was written. It was probated the 4th of June 1687. So we know that he's living in February, and that he has died before the 4th of June, because that's when it was probated, and that he has an uncle, Joseph Howe, who's the executor, and sole legatee of the estate, real and personal. And the witnesses are John Ashby, James Wicks, and Francis Voorsees. Not much there, except we do know that he has an uncle named Joseph Howe. So we've established a relationship based on a single record in a will that we now have to work on expanding. Now, not knowing when Obadiah Howe died, I would have had to gone through this book and maybe a couple of others to figure out exactly where Obadiah Howe was. Whereas using the Magruder book, I was able to hone in just a couple of seconds on where that will might be, if there is one. Now, there's lots of information out there in Maryland that deals with administrations, balance books, thanks to Vernon Skinner. Vernon Skinner has done a lot of work on debt books, on administration accounts, on balance books, on all kinds of things that deal with testacies, intestacies, and all those kind of things. So there is lots of information out there on Maryland probate. But the place to actually start probably is with the Cotton books and the McGrath books, but definitely with the Magruder book. And it's very simple. Should I go through it again? Let's look for John Meredith in 1764. Do I have that book? Yes, 1764, and it's Queen Anne's County. So we'll look up Meredith in the index here. Now you could go through the book because it's in book order, book page order number, but my experience is that it's so much easier just to go right to the index and look for it in the index. Who was I looking for? John Meredith. And he actually has 3 pages. And what you do by dealing with the index, instead of going directly to it, is it allows you to see other places where this person may be a witness, maybe an heir, or some other relationship to the person who has the will. So usually when we would look, we can look at I would look at the last entry, because theoretically, if we're dealing with that person, it will give us the last time. Now, in this case, there must be another person named John Meredith, because that doesn't work. If we go to the next entry, that doesn't work either, so it's probably the same person. And then let's go to one more entry. There are only 3, thank goodness. And I would have wanted to look at all those entries also, but I would know that it wasn't the John Meredith that I was personally dealing with, because this John Meredith of Queen Anne's County, Maryland, wrote the will 14 July 1764, and the will was probated 25 October 1764. And to son William Meredith, 80 acres where he lives, to son John Meredith, and there's probably the John Meredith of the other 2 entries. The dwelling plantation tract called Trustom's Ridge, 100 acres adjoining called Tom's Fancy Enlarged. Clothing, if son John die without issue, then that gives me some idea that in 1764, son John does not have any issue. Then his portion of lands should be disposed of as follows: dwelling place called Trustom Ridge to my son William Meredith, being the remainder of tract to him before bequeathed, land being part of Tom's Fancy Enlarged to my son Thomas Meredith. To son Thomas Meredith, 1 slave. To daughter Sarah Coton, 1 slave. To grandson James Meredith, son of my son William Meredith, 1 slave. Desire after debts be paid, remainder to be divided between above named children, William, John, Thomas, and Sarah. Executor, son John. Witness, Henry Connell, John Scribner, Elizabeth Griffith. And this came from book 32, page 326. So see, we can basically, based on the probate, in just a few minutes, put a few families together, or a few people in a family together. Now, would I stop here? I might, but not normally. It would depend on what my research question actually was. But I would want to go and find the original wills also to see whether either Wright or Cotton earlier would have in fact transcribed the will as I would have transcribed the will. So, Colonial Maryland, wills are collected by the colony until 1777, in other words, until the Revolution, and then after the Revolution, they're in the individual counties. There are 16 volumes of books that deal with abstracting those Maryland wills, and there is a book that indexes basically those years of 1634 to 1777 that allows you to easily get into these books or into the wills themselves. So what I can do is, if you buy the entire set of 16 volumes of Maryland Calendar of Wills, I will give you a 40% discount. And the code will be MD Wills 40. If you buy an individual volume of the Maryland Wills, it will be a 20% discount. And also included with those Maryland Wills at a 20% discount will be Magruder's book, Index to Maryland Colonial Wills, if you would like to get that also. So, another book for a discount. This is Craig. This has been Just Genealogy, talking about Maryland Colonial Wills. And I hope that I have helped you to become more effective and more efficient in your research because of it. Please subscribe if you haven't. Please tell your friends if you haven't. Do you have friends? I do. I hope you do too. Genealogy is one great big family. And we will see you tomorrow.